Derli arkadaşlar, hoş geldiniz, mutlu yıllar. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sismanoglio Megaro. First, I would like to wish you all a happy new year with health and happiness, peace and prosperity for the entire world, as well as accord and cooperation in the relations between our two countries. The lectures that we shall hear today differ considerably from the previous ones as regards topic and approach. Our speakers today focus their attention on the impact of food on the body, dietary habits in relation to health. A highly relevant topic, a key issue in our time, as scientific research is widely known to have proved that many of the most serious diseases are directly linked to factors related to modern diet. This connection has also brought food and dietary habits to the attention of public health and has been highlighted as one of the top priorities in protecting and promoting the health of the population. These topics will be explored by the nutritionists Aleksandra, Kristo, and Angelos Sikalidis. Trained at universities in the United States, they today serve as professors at Yeni, Yüzyıl University. They will speak about the dietary habits in the Aegean populations over time, when soil, climate, and history shaped certain basic nutritional principles that those that today characterize the Mediterranean dietary pattern. The celebrated Mediterranean diet, promoted as a model of healthy eating, counterbalances the Western diet, promoted as a model of healthy eating, overburdened with a high consumption of meat, fat and sugar, which took over as a result of globalization and is considered responsible for the increasing rates of diabetes, heart disease, etc. Let us remember Hippocrates, the father of medicine, recommended, let the food be the medicine and the medicine be the food. If diet today is a matter of choice, I must emphasize, though for only some populations on our planet, let's not forget that, no one can claim that it was the same in olden times in the Eastern Mediterranean basin we are studying. People then ate whatever they could find, whenever and wherever they found it. However, game, cheese for the rich and mainly barley bread for the poor, mast pulses, and everyone drank plenty of wine, a high-calorie product. Wine then was also food. The Byzantinist Ilias Anagnostakis, head of the program Daily Life in Byzantium at the National Hellenic Research Foundation, who has carried out major studies in the field of diet and in the culture of food and wine, presents new data on the research into Byzantine times, which assisted today by new methods such as zooarchaeology, and bioarchaeology, the isotopic analysis of skeletal remains studies the impact of diet on the health status of Byzantine population. Such research on children's skeletons, for example, has proved that they were deprived of the basic vitamins and nutrients from the breast milk. Before concluding this brief introduction that I usually do each time, I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised to see the latest issue of the periodical Yemek ve Kültür, number 38, an excellent magazine published by Moussa Bey from Chia Restaurant with his brilliant editorial team. What a happy coincidence. Some of the pages contain discussions with today's lecturers. It also includes a study of Christine Hastorf and Sonia Atalay on the diet of the people of Çatalhöyük during Neolithic times. Neolithic Çatalhöyük'te yemek, which was based on findings from the excavation. And the same issue also devotes some pages to the work of Andrew Dalby, who derived speculation about matters of diet and gastronomy in the Byzantine era. I say again, what a happy coincidence. Mr. Merianos, main collaborator of the Daily Life of Byzantium project, will read us the paper written by Ilias Anagnostakis and will answer your questions as Mr. Anagnostakis could not be with us today. Mr. Merianos, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Balta. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have to say that I feel privileged once again to be here in the Queen of Cities, even as a reader. And I want to say that Dr. Anagnostakis expresses his regret for not being able to be here, and he sends his greetings. And I want to stress that everything follows is his and only his, of course. So, this lecture will present some new interpretations of sources on Byzantine diet and some zooarchaeological findings from more recent research concerning Byzantium. This new data contradicts the prevailing view created by hagiographic texts and monastery rules. We consider it useful to provide some maps to make it clear from the outset about which area, period, and population size we are talking about each time we refer to the periods of the empire, early, middle, and late Byzantine. The 7th and the 12th centuries can be considered milestones, ushering in changes even in dietary habits. The population size marked on the maps concerns a multi-ethnic population of the empire that is called Romania. This population in the east was mostly composed of Greek-speaking Romans, Romei, and some Latin-speaking peoples in the Balkans, but also of Syrians, Egyptians, Armenians, many other Caucasians, and from the 7th century onwards, of a large number of Slavs, Bulgarians, Vlachs, and a few Jews. Many Romans, Romei, living outside the empire, are not included in this number. Yet, as we shall see further on, Although geographical and administrative borders affected the habits of the population to a certain extent, they did not necessarily form gastronomic and dietary boundaries. Or to put it in a different way, many gastronomic and dietary habits are common among numerous nations, Arabs, Slavs, Latins, and empires, and do not observe shifting political borders. A few years ago, I published an article that caused a sensation and provoked harsh criticism, as I claimed that the so-called Mediterranean diet did not exist in Byzantium. Since then, it has of course been argued that the intransigence that grew up during the last century was probably based on the findings of a more modern reality. But it can in no way be detected or confirmed in a more distant past, such as in medieval times. Bread, wine, and oil were obviously the key flagship products of prosperous Mediterranean countries and symbols of cultural distinction from the countries of the north and south. Yet, this changes over the long term. It does not remain stable, and therefore, according to the season and the region, with climate changes and population upheavals, it creates unexpected turmoil. Lately, various education programs and gastronomers have been clamoring about the Byzantium of oil, the Byzantium of ladera dishes cooked in oil and fasting, even launching fast food restaurants, serving fasting dishes without meat, without butter, without salted meats and fats, etc. It is a commercial trend, welcoming but based on a unilateral religious approach to Byzantine gastronomy. Recently, a Byzantine cook of fasting food, a Palestinian monk, Saint Euphrosynos, has been proposed as the patron saint of the Orthodox cooks. The Byzantines, probably even the monks, were little interested in what today we call, and which was defined in various ways, by the physicians of late antiquity as a healthy diet. What is today promoted as a supposedly healthy Orthodox Byzantium and marketed by some, namely oil-based ladera dishes without fat and meat, was just imposed out of necessity in particular regions of the empire, and probably only in some monasteries due to prohibitions and enforced fasting. It would be really worth taking a look at the position of oil and the fat content of meat in Byzantine economy and diet. I can say in advance that Byzantium was swimming in grease, literally smothered, caked in fat, and it enjoyed vast amounts of fatty meat. During the early Byzantine years and up until the Arab conquest, 7th century, the center of Mediterranean oil production was located in the eastern provinces, and particularly in Cyprus, Cilicia, Syria and Palestine, North Africa, nowadays Tunisia. These were extensively cultivated areas with mass production, which exported olive oil and wine. Oil and wine traders transported the product by sea to Constantinople, Alexandria, Italy. This state of affairs in production and trading ceased, however, to exist after the 7th century with the Arab conquest. The Greek peninsula, the islands, and the coastal northwestern Asia Minor were oil-producing area of little importance to the imperial economy during the early Byzantine years. In these areas, oil production and trading was mostly important on a local scale, and it was only from the Middle Byzantine years onwards, with the loss of almost all the oil-producing areas of Anatolia, that a certain awareness and shift towards more intensive olive growing can be seen. Time after time in Constantinople itself, there are accounts even of a lack of oil for the lamps in the churches, obviously due to the climate in the Balkan and Asia Minor hinterland, and also in the olive-bearing Peloponnese, perhaps at times of limited production. In Byzantium, however, despite the fact that in a few areas like Bithynia and Smyrna region, even the stones gassed oil, the prevailing reality is that described in the case of Asia Minor: no oil, no wine. Even on Easter Sunday, in some monasteries, let alone among the population, there was neither flour, nor wine, nor oil, poverty everywhere. It must be pointed out that islands we recognize today as olive-bearing, like Mytilene, were covered with vines and not olive trees. Crete itself did not produce oil. In both cases, the situation changed in modern times after the period of Turkish rule. The same can be seen in Byzantine Italy. At some point during the second half of the 9th century, there is evidence of an acute shortage of oil in Constantinople to the extent that churches, even the Church of Hagia Sophia, were in danger of running out of oil for their lamps. So, oil was almost a luxury, constantly scarce throughout the empire and highly prized. Oil was primarily used during the Byzantine era, as in antiquity, in worship, lighting, in medicine and hygiene, in grooming, and was later used intensively in food. Its rating in specific use and consumption varies and differs according to era and region, as well as to social stratification. Fish and poultry, either boiled or baked, on charcoal or a grill, prevailed. Foods fried in oil came in second or third place. Oil was available to the wealthy classes, noblemen, clergy, officials, for use in all possible ways, including, of course, in their food. They could prepare several Byzantine dishes either with butter or oil, mainly pulses or vegetable dishes with oil, spongata, omelets, broths, soups, fried foods, fish, eggs, placenta cake, etc. And at rich tables, in fact, the use of oil in elaborate sauces and dressings was common, such as garum with oil and vinegar. Gyros was a thick liquid preparation made from salted fish guts or small fish and oregano. Diluted with water, wine, vinegar, and of course oil, it was used as a dressing for food, mainly vegetables, salads, etc. As opposed to the monasteries, to the palace and the noblemen, for the majority of the population, particularly in areas where olive trees did not thrive, oil was completely absent from the daily diet and its place was taken by fats or olive oil substitutes, such as linseed, walnut, hazelnut, mustard seed, refined oil, etc. Due to the fact that from the 7th century onwards, traditional crops were abandoned for a variety of reasons and people withdrew inland, especially to non-olive growing zones, there was a spectacular increase in stock farming. This had an impact on diet. In contrast to the totally unilateral and distorted picture we are presented with by monastery rules, the dietary reality for rural as well as urban populations, who always had poultry, animals, game, fish at their disposal, was different. Wild grains, pulses, meat stored for food, dairy products, fats, salted preserves, and minimal oil prevailed. Lard, raw or roasted, salted meat, sausages, game, smoked salted meats preserved in vinegar or their own fat were the main long-lasting foods, as the home could be without oil for years or even permanently. Particularly in mountainous area of Byzantium, in the northern Balkans and on islands, sheep and goats provided butter and cheeses for consumption, while pork, with its blessed fat, prepared in numerous ways, was the main source of food. Over recent decades, numerous studies have each in their own way supported the aforementioned views. It must also be noted that already in 1986, the imported study of Debinska appeared that for the first time compared the calorie content of food portions in the Middle Ages in Byzantium and in the West. Unfortunately, the calorie amounts processed are mainly for monasteries, but they are the only safe measurements we have and which can provide relevant information. This, of course, renders their use purely indicative, I could say unilateral, if not even risky, and they are not suitable for general findings or general conclusions. Before presenting the results of this study, we will give a similar measurement of the annual rations of a simple monk Damianos based on a document from the monastery of Great Lavra on Mount Athos. Here on the left, we have the products, namely cereals, legumes, wine, oil, and honey. What is strange is the excessive amount of honey, which certainly does not refer to honey consumption. One explanation that could be put forward for the large amount of honey, usually given as honeycomb, is the need for making candles, or even that the said honey makes up for the lack of calories and other basic nutrients caused by the absence of meat and dairy products in the monastic diet. Going now to Maria Debinska's tables, I must say again that this is a study that for the first time compares the amounts of calories in daily food consumption in medieval monasteries in Byzantium and the West. In this table, we can see the daily food ration of monks in the French monasteries of Saint-Germain-des-Prés in Paris in 829, and in the monastery of Notre Dame in Picardy in 858. In the first column, basic products are indicated: bread, pot vegetables, cheese, fat, wine, while in the second one, the quantity and then the corresponding calories, protein, fat, and carbohydrates are mentioned. In this table, we can see the daily food ration of monks in 3 monasteries of Constantinople in the 11th and 12th centuries. In this third table, Debinska compares the nutritive value of food consumed in Western Byzantine monasteries in the 9th to 12th centuries. And she also gives them the comparison with 19th to 20th century lower income diet of cotton workers, indoor and rural workers. I don't think we have the time to explain the tables more detailed. On occasions, all these tables have been used to show the low calorific values of the Byzantines' food, the relative poverty or poor nutrition. I believe that none of these are true for Byzantium. They are simply an indication as they refer to monastic communities, and any conclusions about the Byzantine population as a whole are foolhardy. However, it is worth pointing out that nutritive, calorific values of food consumed in Byzantine monasteries are shown as being higher than those of 19th and 20th century proletarian workers. Ultimately, the only conclusions one can draw from comparing these tables are: first, basic foodstuffs are almost identical in both Byzantine and Western institutions. Second, calories in the daily food consumption per head in 9th century Western monasteries are 1/3 higher than those in 11th and 12th century Byzantine monasteries. One explanation could be climate. In other words, this variation can be considered reasonable and almost essential in cold climates. Yet, it could also mean more rigorous ascetic supervision and implementation of fasting in Byzantium. Third, it should be noted that these tables obviously do not include the special, almost individual treatment of abbots, guests, or other groups within the monastic community that enjoyed a different portion, quality, and type of food or amount of wine. Recently, a multidisciplinary approach, drawing data from a diversity of fields such as history, archaeology, biology, and chemistry, has provided evidence on Byzantine diet. Special mention must be made of the work of Chryssi Bourbou on the Greek peninsula and islands in the Byzantine era. Although studies of floral and faunal assemblages from Byzantine contexts are extremely rare, the number of zooarchaeological analyses available offers first-hand evidence of the most frequently encountered animals and fishes in Byzantine contexts, for some of which we already have relevant references in the sources. Bone analysis and isotopic values detected allow us to identify the consumption of cereals and pulses, dairy products, types of meat, and seafood. To date, isotopic data is available for 8 Byzantine sites in Greece, 6th to 15th centuries. These 8 Byzantine populations represent mainly rural communities that are dependent on agricultural and stock farming or participate in other secondary activities. For example, the assemblage from a house complex in eastern Crete, 5th to 7th centuries, included the remains of small and large fishes such as sea breams, parrotfish, and pickerels. This is the most interesting finding because the consumption of significant amounts of fish and seafood during the Byzantine period is in contrast to previous isotopic analysis of prehistoric Greek populations, in whose diet not much seafood can be detected. One hypothesis that has recently been put forward and deserves further investigation, shows that 2 factors played a part in shaping this diet. First, the improvement in fishing techniques with the development of a well-organized fish market. And second, the fasting regulations of the Church, whose diet calendar imposed some form of dietary restriction for almost half the days of the year. Just as we cannot presume that everybody adhered to the fasting regime, nor can we exclude the role of fasting in the daily diet. It must be noted that a number of similar studies among populations in the medieval West have revealed the increasing significance of fish in the medieval diet throughout the year, and this can be explained by the development of fishing techniques and fasting regulations. Among the domesticated animals, sheep, goats, and pigs usually predominate in zooarchaeological samples, but evidence for the consumption of game is provided by the remains of red deer found at Middle Byzantine sites, 11th to 12th centuries. Despite the extensive geographical and chronological life of the sites studied, it is believed that the isotopic results may support a rather general model of Byzantine diet. In all these sites, diet was mainly based on domesticated animals, for example, sheep and goats, and cereals, wheat and barley, and only minimal use of millet was noted. A high consumption of meat or dairy products, namely milk, cheese, and oxygala, that is yogurt, is also found. The consumption, if not of meat, then of animal and dairy products, must be considered equally important to fish. Tables based on zooarchaeological analysis recently drawn up by researchers, like the zooarchaeologist Kroll, verify the extent of the presence of many species of animal in Byzantium, as provoked by skeletal remains and assemblages. The tables may also indicate in many cases, such as for poultry or sheep and goats, the level of consumption, and indeed in areas from southern Italy to Egypt and Syria. A comparison is even made of percentages of their presence during Roman, early Byzantine, and Middle Byzantine period. This table here reveals the increase during Byzantine years in the presence and indeed in the consumption of animal products, sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. It shows the arithmetical mean of the main domestic mammal percentages in the regions of the empire in comparison to the Roman period. Anthony King's results, 1999. The inner circle is for the Roman period, the medium and outer circle for the early and middle Byzantine periods. For Egypt, only the Byzantine percentage is depicted. On this table, the indication of cattle could also refer to the consumption of products, milk, cheeses, butter, etc., and not meat. This issue always remains open to investigation, as it is generally believed that the Byzantines did not consume meat from cattle, animals they used primarily and extensively in agricultural work. The next table shows the arithmetical mean of the chicken percentage among the domestic species and of different bird ecogroup percentages. The size of the circle symbolizes the relative significance of fowl in the respective regions. Lastly, excuse me for a moment. Lastly, the third table indicates the zooarchaeological findings for game in the Byzantine state. Here too, the size of the circles symbolizes the relative significance of game in the respective regions. We see the expected high rate of cervids, wild boar, leporids, in other words, a strong presence and consequently high consumption of game, including deer, roe deer, wild boar, hares, wild goats. It goes without saying that the wolves, foxes, bears, even dolphins stated can only be taken into account as indications of hunting and not as data on Byzantine diet. The aforementioned findings should not lead us to conjure up a picture of excessive meat-eating in Byzantium. Quite the opposite. The Byzantines simply ate what they had. They had little choice, just as it was even a few decades ago in the everyday lives of rural populations, forgotten by researchers, which consumed precisely what was available. Consequently, what we are provided with unilaterally by the sources, mainly for monasteries, must be treated with great caution when it concerns monastic dietary regulations. These regulations are a fascinating indication of food consumption by groups in Byzantine society, in this case, monks. Groups that never exceeded 10 to 15% of the total population and which were probably in a more favorable position, if we exclude, of course, officials, the rich, soldiers, and the middle class in the towns and provinces. However, the analysis of human skeletal remains is more advanced, and the study of the observed pathological conditions offers an important insight into the impact of diet on the health status of Byzantine populations. Among other factors, the development of dental plaque, for example, is associated with a more protein-rich diet, while seafood is considered as preventing the development of tooth decay, dental caries. Similarly, a vitamin B12 deficient diet, vitamin B12 can be found in, for example, fish and shellfish, meat, poultry, eggs, and dairy products, is much more likely to be one of the basic factors responsible for the manifestation of porous lesions on the orbital roof, cribra orbitalia, and the cranial vault, porotic hyperostosis. And staying on the subject of the mouth, and indeed of milking and breastfeeding infants, I must mention a recent study by Bourbu with the English title Hide and Seek, that refers both to the children's game as well as to seeking and finding hidden information in children's skeletons. It is worth noting that childhood, babyhood to a lesser extent, is an issue that specialists admit plays hide and seek with us, as it did not interest the Byzantines at all. Or more precisely, they were not interested in recording it. It is precisely this negation of childhood, typical of medieval and other societies, that has resulted in a serious lack of information. In actual fact, despite the progress made in researching Byzantine sources, we ultimately know very little about children's lives and upbringing in Byzantium. And here, bioarchaeology comes to impressively fill the gap. Thanks to studies like that of Bourbu, today we have important data on children's diet, diseases, and mortality. Her anthropological material consists of a significant sample of 448 children from various locations throughout Greece during the early and middle Byzantine period, 6th to 7th and 11th to 12th centuries. Material that provides us with valuable data, and with the implementation of specialized chemical analysis, stable isotopes of carbon and nitrogen, the duration of breastfeeding and the start of weaning are determined. One of the most important findings of this study, apart from metabolic disorders, osteomyelitis, anemia and iron deficiency, is that of scurvy, which it is surprising to find in children from Mediterranean rural communities. Both the lack of iron as well as the lack of ascorbic acid, vitamin C, in the chemical analysis of the children's skeletons are interpreted according to the eating habits accompanying the weaning of infants, namely when the children ate only gruel and sheep or goat's milk, and were therefore deprived of the basic nutrients in breast milk. I close with this example in the belief that in this way I emphasize in the best way possible the progress being made by multidisciplinary groups studying Byzantine diet, in which our contribution as historians and philologists is supplementary. Each of us, within the enforced restrictions of his field, has much to learn from the other. Thank you very much.
Another colleague, and now we have the second lecture done by Mr. Sikalidis. Let's see what is a Mediterranean diet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. So today In this talk, we will discuss the main elements regarding the diets of the population in the Aegean region, a lecture prepared by Professor Dr. Kristo and myself. So, in the context of the present talk, we will discuss the two focal periods in terms of nutrition and dietary habits. The first, signifying the old times, entails the classical and the Hellenistic period, and the second, signifying the old times, entails, signifying the new times, entails modern and contemporary times before and after 1980s through the effect of globalization. The Byzantine times have already been discussed, so we will be focusing on the remaining time periods as explained. So, after signifying what is old and what is new for us, let's talk a little bit about the term diet. So, the word diet, Middle English diete from Old French, is derived from Latin dieta, way of living, which in turn is derived from Greek dieta or dieta, which is a back formation from ancient Greek dietasthe, to live one's life, and it's the middle voice of dietan, which means to treat. That's according to the American Heritage Dictionary. But in a more simplified version, what diet means, according to the ancient Greeks, and later on to what they passed on to the civilizations after them, diet really means a way or a view of life, including but not limited to nutrition. Now, what we mean with diet today is more complex and unfortunately less inclusive. Nowadays, in nutrition, diet is the sum of food consumed by a person or other organism. The word diet often implies the use of specific intake of nutrition for health or weight management reasons. For instance, we say often, I'm not going to eat A because I'm on a diet, or I'm going to eat B because I'm on a diet. Dietary habits are the decisions, the habitual decisions to be exact, of an individual or a culture that makes when they choose what foods to eat. And finally, dietary habits and choices play a significant role in the quality of life, health, and longevity. They can define cultures and play a significant role in religion. Now, humans are omnivores, but in each culture and each person holds certain food preferences and some food taboos. This may be due to personal preferences, tastes, or ethical reasons. And some of those individual dietary choices can be more or less healthy. After signifying the old and new and how we like to think of diet, let's talk about the location, the Aegean region and the population of the Aegean. The Aegean Sea was named after the Athenian king Aegeus, father of Theseus. The name derives from the Greek word Aegeus, which means waves, metaphorically. According to Eusebius of Alexandria, it is a metaphorical use of the word ex, which means literally goat. So the word in ancient Greek literally means goat, and metaphorically means waves. So the term Aegean Sea metaphorically means a wavy sea in ancient Greek. To move to the core question of what the Aegean populations were consuming in the past, I will refer to a suggestion by a friend of mine at Harvard who said, oh yes, the ancient Greeks used to eat the wow diet because it's amazing, or because it's founded on the Mediterranean triad, wow standing for wheat, olive oil, and wine. We know that in the early days, according to ancient descriptions such as those of Homer, cereals, legumes, olives, olive oil, and wine were widely consumed. Again, in the Homeric times, among the aristocratic heroes, We know that we read about salted meat from cattle, sheep, and goats, as well as bread, to be staples. Now, which portion of the meat was served corresponded to social status, and that is very interesting. Like their southern Mediterranean neighbors, the Egyptians, the Greeks favored particularly the allium family. So they were very fond of onions, garlic, and leek. The nuts, and in particular bitter almonds and varieties of pistachios, contributed significantly to the nutrition of the Aegean inhabitants since the Paleolithic period. The lentil, the fava bean, and other pulses represented important sources of nutrients and energy. And that was the case for both the pre-agriculture and the agriculture inhabitants of the region. Other goods like grapes, figs, pears, apples, plums, and berries were extensively consumed, either in the wild form or even cultivated in some cases throughout the classical period. Mushrooms and honey were available, and fish was eaten fresh, dried, or pickled. Tomatoes and potatoes came much later in the region, but they were quickly and massively adopted. The Aegean region, and to some extension the Mediterranean basin, were fortunate to see agriculture from the very early onwards. Wheat, barley, and lentil, we have evidence to conclude that they were being cultivated in the region since 6000 BC. Grape since 5000 BC. Olive, 3500 BC on Crete, and it was introduced to the Peloponnese in 2000 BC. So the Cretans had olive oil first. Milk and cheese from sheep and goat was known to have been consumed since the 3000 BC. Now, in the classical period, if you were poor, or if you were in a rural region, what would your diet be based on? It would mostly be a vegetable-based food pattern, where you would be consuming barley, cakes, nuts and pulses, plenty of wine and vegetables. And you would supplement that, excuse me, with olives, fish, shellfish, and small quantities of meat and dairy. There was also meat available, but not to a great extent in terms of quantity and frequency. But wild pig, hare, deer, and ibex were meat sources in the classical antiquity and thereafter. Most of the times, the meat that was consumed under these circumstances was coming from sacrifices. So it was the meat that was the product of the offerings to the gods. Wild greens, herbs, honey, snails, fish, and seafood were also plenty. Now, I will take a moment to stay on the olive and the olive tree, because the olive cultivation and culture was critical and key, and it was one of those points that signified the ancient Greek civilization. The olive tree became a central symbol in ancient Greece, and olive oil was not only used for its valuable nutritional quality, but also for medicinal, ritual, and religious purposes. A very good example of that is the olive tree branch Kotinos, which was awarded to the Olympic game winner, along with his payment, which at the time was considerable, 5 tons for the first place. So if you remember what Dr. Anagnostakis said about how important oil was in Byzantium, it was almost like gold. 5 tons of olive oil is a good capital, to put it that way. Now, descriptions from Homer and many depictions on potteries and frescoes show clearly that the people in the region from the ancient Greek times knew a series of foods and practices like fish and seafood, olives and olive oil, wine, various meats such as pork, goat, sheep, and beef. Now, regarding food preservation, many storage facilities that were found in Crete and other places in southern Greece have proven that ancients would store seeds and wheat, olive oil and wine, and had methods for storage and preservation like salting and seasoning. So now that we know more or less what the ancients would like to eat, how would they eat it? What were their meals and what were they comprised of? According to Philemon of Syracuse, during the classical period, the daily diet was consumed in the following distinct meals. First was the akratismos. It was the breakfast which was taken after sunrise. It consisted of barley bread dipped in wine, akratos, inos, akratos, which means unadulterate, without water. And it was complemented by figs or olives. Now, sometimes the ancient Greeks would have pancakes for breakfast. They would call it tiganitis or tiganias, all words deriving from tiganon, which literally means frying pan. Ariston was a quick meal around noon or early afternoon. Esperisma was a light meal in the late afternoon. And dipnon, dinner, was the most important meal of the day, and it was taken at nightfall. Sometimes the ancient Greeks would have what they would call the aristodipnon, which is a combination of lunch and dinner, which would be served in the late afternoon instead of dinner. And the Canadian friends have an equivalent, they call it lupper. It's the conjugation of lunch and supper. Now, the ancient Greek dining was critical in the social life of Greeks because it functioned as feeding not only the body, but also the mind. Ancient Greeks used to eat on couches, reclining languidly on one arm, using the free hand to eat. The food was prepared in bite-sized portion and was eaten with bread, a flat pita-style bread, and a raised bread for absorbing the soup. So they would dip it in the soup and they would take the soup along with the bread. 2 courses were served. First, the dipnon, which was an assortment of potent flavored appetizers served prior to the meat and fish dishes. And then the second, the symposium, where wine was served with specially chosen flavors and foods like sitos, which was barley and or wheat, depending on what was available, and the financial condition of the household, and opsa, which is a collection of sea bass, salad of bitter herbs, cheese and onions. Now, the symposium was very important because it was the time for discussions of ideas, philosophy, sharing of views on every aspect of life, problem solving, arguing, sometimes vigorously, pondering, laughing, making jokes, having fun, hearing stories. The position and the orientation of the activity was not random. The Greeks used to position their body in a way that would put the minimum force to the liver and the gallbladder, thus allowing them to endure, as a good strategy, long dinner sessions, especially those including wine and fatty foods. Also, that position optimized the blood circulation. Homer also underlines another important element of the Mediterranean culture around the table, which has to do with the community and the social dimension of the table. For the people of the Mediterranean, the activity of taking a meal is an important social activity. It is an opportunity to philosophize, discovering yourself and others, and finally discover the truth, and go down a path that would lead you to arete, which is the ultimate goal of the ancient Greek philosophy, virtue. So people are brought together and bonded in a very unique way around the table. Oftentimes, a symposium is a way to resolve even a dispute. When I was in California doing my master's, I met quite a few people there who were claiming that vegetarianism as a modern movement was started at Berkeley, California. Little did these fellows know about Triptolemus, who actually is the first known recorded vegetarian. Triptolemus has practiced abstinence from animal consumption and has taught early dietary practices based on a philosophy of three major directives: honor thy parents, honor gods by offering fruits, and be merciful to animals. And on this slide, we see a picture of Triptolemus receiving wheat sheaves from Demeter, goddess of agriculture, and blessings from Persephone, goddess of fertility, 5th century BC relief, which is found in National Archaeological Museum of Athens. Apart from feeding the body and the brain, a philosophical approach to diet through the sense of moderation was given by ancient Greek philosopher Plato. The principle of moderation was widely taught by Plato, and he, as being one of the most important philosophers in classical Greece, also applied his philosophy to human diet as well. According to Plato, a healthy diet consists mainly of cereals, legumes, fruits, milk, honey, and fish, whereas meat, sweets, and wine should be only consumed in moderation. Food excess has to be avoided since it can lead to disease. In addition, and very, very interestingly, Plato considered that physicians, like medical doctors, and not cooks, should be responsible for the human diet. In the Platonic work, abundant references to the human diet serve as a platform for intellectual quests while criticizing the materialistic concepts of life and condemning the attachment to earthly possessions. So according to Plato, and we read from the Republic, the first chief of our needs is the provision of food for existence and life. In other words, Plato was a proponent of the Delphic order miden agan, which means do not exaggerate. From the father of philosophy, moving to the father of medicine, a holistic medicinal approach was put forth through diet, exercise, and health by Hippocrates. According to Hippocrates, health is the state of balance of elements and humors, whereas disease represented imbalance. He stressed the importance of moderation in food intake and regularity of meals, as well as the importance of food variety and choice according to the seasons. He often would use lifestyle changes or modifications, predominantly diet and exercise, to treat diseases such as diabetes, what is today called lifestyle medicine. And he was actually the one to first diagnose and describe diabetes and even name the disease. Diabetes, from the Greek diaveno, which means to travel, for glucose to travel from the mouth to the urine. In this sense, he was accurate in his perception of diet as a set of lifestyle parameters that influence health and disease. He is particularly known for two of his quotes: "Let food be your medicine and medicine be your food," and "Walking is man's best medicine." Finally, Archestratos, who is considered the father of gastronomy, issued 5 golden rules about cooking and eating. First, use raw food materials of good quality, combine them harmoniously, avoid hot sauces and spices, prefer lighter sauces to enjoy the meal, and use spices moderately so as to not interfere with natural flavors. All of them, they are still in use they're still applied by the world's top chefs and top culinary connoisseurs and top gastronomists. In fact, this is the essence of fine dining and delicatessen. Through his travels in southern Italy, Sicily, Greece, Asia Minor, and the Black Sea, Archestratus recorded his culinary findings in a very humorous poet, which is entitled Idipathia, Life of Luxury, which is only partially preserved via its references in the Dipnosophistes. Fish was highly praised by Archestratus, who noted the importance of season and location when it comes to the optimum time to eat fish. Thus, he offered knowledge that informs the modern fishermen and culinary experts even today. Now, as Dr. Balta mentioned in her opening remarks, in the Aegean region, similar to most areas of the world, the poor people had to make their food from whatever sources were available. But the diet in the Aegean region changed very slowly during the past 3 millennia, although, as mentioned by the Dr. Anagnostakis lecture, there seems to be a discontinuity to a certain degree in the Byzantine times. We learn again about the diet in the Mediterranean region, particularly in the Aegean, through a formal scientific study much later in 1948 on Crete. At the time, the Greek government hired Dr. Albot from the Rockefeller Foundation to study Crete and make suggestions to improve post-war conditions. And here we quote from Dr. Albot's journals, which were published and released after the conclusion of his study. Olives, cereal, grains, pulses, fruit, wild greens and herbs, together with limited quantities of goat meat and milk, game and fish, consist the basic Cretan foods. No meal was complete without bread. Olives and olive oil contributed heavily to the energy intake. Food seemed literally to be swimming in oil. The food consumption levels were surprisingly good, though. On the whole, the food pattern and food habits were extremely well adapted to their natural and economic resources, as well as their needs. So Dr. Albot said, and he concluded with that no improvement was needed, as Cretan diet was described as surprisingly good and very conducive to heart health. Not too many years later, the island of Crete was included in the 7 country studies where the renowned physician Ansel Keys set to clarify the relationship between diet and cardiovascular disease. Striking observations came from Crete, where people lived longer and suffered much less from heart disease. This phenomenon was explained by what the people there were eating, which was a plant-based diet closely resembling the diet of their ancient ancestors. After the 7 country study, the Cretan diet served as the basis for building the Mediterranean diet pyramid in the early 90s. The introduction of the Mediterranean diet was more than timely because it was almost coinciding with the advent of globalization and food trends. The Mediterranean diet, as introduced by the scientific community, is a series of recommendations for the public for improving health and longevity. At the basis of this diet is food of plant origin, while the concepts of moderation and socializing was also put forth, while none of this was new to the people of the Aegean region. However, it used to be so not so much because of choice, but because of necessity. Ironically, around the same time that the scientific community and eventually the whole world started discussing the Mediterranean diet, sadly, the eating habits of the people started changing for the worse. According to current trends, what we see is that there is a continually higher energy consumption along with a decline in plant-based foods. That's what we observe today in both sides of the Aegean, and not just the Aegean, but the entire world. The Aegean region is unfortunately following the global trends in westernization of diet and health or disease, for that matter. According to the most recent data by the World Health Organization, the people in the Aegean region are now dying, mostly because of non-communicable diseases, diseases that theoretically could be prevented. Diseases of chronic nature, such as heart disease or cancer, and these are highly preventable by diet and lifestyle changes. These data indicate that the current dietary habits of the Aegean population need to change, and basically what they need to do is they need to change back. They need to change to what they used to be 25 to 30 years ago. And one approach would be to follow the steps of our ancestors and preserve our food traditions in order to protect our health. So, would we like to be eating like in the good old times, or would we like to continue what we just started maybe 20, 25 years ago? The choice is ours. And indeed, it is ours because we, as consumers, are maybe the most powerful people, for that matter. Each and every one of you vote every day, at least 3 times a day. You vote every time you choose what you eat, what you buy, where you spend your dollars, euros, lira, whatever your currency of choice is. So what you basically buy is what you support. This is what the market will give you. So would we like to see more of the old things that would actually contribute to our health and basically also helps us preserve our traditions? There are some very good efforts lately for reviving or basically having the old ways staying as far as the Mediterranean diet and the Aegean diet is concerned. And it would certainly be to our benefit to vote these things in order to stay. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aleksandra Kristo and Dr. Angelos Sikalidis for this rich conference, for this very plenty of products, healthy products, and rich of tastes. Let's talk now. I wait your questions. If Sorunus Varsa, Achikas. Tamam.
I would like to thank both of the speakers for their speeches. I could not follow the first speaker because I was late to hear, but both of the speakers have been very valuable to me. But I think we have to think of something else at this point, and I'm looking for an answer to this question, because yes, the distinguished speakers have warned us to go back to the natural. In the period after 1948, the eating habits, the dietary habits began to change on both sides of Aegean, but we have to follow something here. The expected lifetime has increased. In 90s, the expected lifetime was much shorter, and considering the current situation, the expected lifetime is around 75 to 80 now. And speaking of going back to the old times, no one would like to die at the age of 40. So I would like to ask the opinion of both speakers in this respect, with respect to expected lifetime. Sikalidis, you should be answering this question actually.
right, thank you. I heard the question. So, obviously, before 1948, many things were different. So, one of the things that was different was that there was constant war. Also, the level of medicine was also very different. So, the fact that the life expectancy was much lower before the 90s was not necessarily because of bad or poor dietary habits, but it was mostly because of poor hygiene standards. So yes, we have improved significantly the hygiene standards, and according to the WHO, we can clearly see, even in Turkey, a huge shift. People are not dying of measles, and they're not dying of, they don't have premature deaths anymore, because the hygiene standards have been improved, because you do have medical personnel in remote villages, because you do have sanitation, because you do have a sewer system, which you didn't have, or you didn't have as developed in the past. And to a certain extent, we need to acknowledge that the food industry has done a good job in terms of providing safe foods. But the alarming fact is that we're seeing childhood obesity, we're seeing heart disease being on the rise. We may be living longer, but we live with disease. We live in beds, we live crippled, we live with medication that basically are putting a lot of stress on our livers and kidneys and so forth. So we don't live good years. All right? So the question is whether we can keep the good things about the advantages of medicine and hygiene, but also keep the good things that we would have, would be able to have through nutrition. And that would be basically getting the best of both worlds. And I think that this should be the target. So that we would be able to both live many years and good years. I believe that that's pretty much my answer. You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you. Merci.
Konuşmacılara teşekkür ederim.
I would like to thank the speakers.
Ben özellikle felsefe tarihinde Yunan kültürünü çok önemsiyorum.
I consider the Greek culture very important in the history of philosophy because it started with Socrates, then continued with Plato, Aristoteles, and this issue has obtained a very important place in the philosophy history, and also the nutrition culture is very important. The second speaker has also mentioned for the maintenance of the life, this nutrition issue is very important. Of course, increasing the life expectancy depends on the improvement in medicine, especially in the Western world, in Europe and in America. We are seeing now that the obesity is a huge disease, and it is related to wrong nutrition, wrong ways of eating, and also increased diseases are also related to wrong eating habits. So, as mentioned by the second speaker, we have to support the healthy eating culture, and thank you for your opinions.
Mr. Sikalidis.
Yes, actually, one thing that I wanted to point out, based on necropsies and based on assessments of overall health and tissue health, maybe this generation, like my generation, will be the generation that will live less than the previous generation. So, and if you consider this as a fact, it is a very sad development. Every generation was proud to say that our children lived longer than us. If we reach a point where we reverse that for the first time in history, then this is a very, very sad negative record. And that we do it in a time of abundance, at least in the West. We do it in a time of abundance in terms of finances and in terms of food availability. So this is why it is critical to pay attention to chronic diseases and this silent killer of all these diseases. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben Akdeniz beslenme modelinin, yani bu Girit örneği üzerine kurulan beslenme modelinin faydalı bir model olduğunu düşünüyorum.
I believe that Mediterranean diet, which is based on the Crete, is very healthy. But as mentioned by Dr. Anagnostakis, since the Byzantine period, this was not present in the entire Aegean lands. So it did not last for 3,000 years. Actually, in the ancient Aegean, in the Byzantine and Ottoman era, there is this theory of Humerus, and this understanding of health and nutrition is part of this. And Hippocrates and the ones after him proposed a healthy eating model, but we should also mention that it is based on this theory of Humerus, which is not valid at all today. Also, in the Ottoman era, there wasn't a consumption which was based on this Mediterranean diet, and there was an eating habit based on the class differences, and it was also based on the availability. So I would like to ask you, according to this theory of Humerus, this eating model actually disappeared in Europe after 18th century, and what was its role in the past?
Go ahead. You're the historian, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your question. It is not an easy task to fill the gap of Dr. Anagnostakis' absence, so this is more or less my opinion on the subject. You're totally right, especially concerning Crete. Diet is not a matter of choice, but as Dr. Anagnostakis has already mentioned through his paper, is a matter of necessity. And this leaves us with not a proper continuity throughout time concerning Mediterranean way of eating in let's say in both sides of the Aegean. Especially the theory of the four humors was prominent in Byzantine time, and it was prominent very much after Byzantine time. But I can't speak about early modern times. Thank you.
All right. I'm not a historian, but according to my knowledge and my studies, the first one to have spoken about the humor theory was, as I mentioned, Hippocrates himself. Now, these, since he was considered, along with Galen, the founders of medicine, at least in Western medicine, his theories were celebrated during the Byzantine times. And one of the things that happened towards the end and after the Byzantine times was that a lot of ancient Greek writings were taken and translated and preserved by the Arabs. And then the people in Italy, the Latins, actually took these manuscripts in monasteries and they translated them in Latin, from the Arabic to the Latin, and that was basically the beginning of Renaissance. Okay, so they were reintroduced. They rediscovered these theories, and those theories were coming, well, they were generated in the West, they went a trip to the East, and then they were reintroduced to the West through the preservation of these knowledge from the Arabs. And then when these things were translated into Latin, they basically flooded Europe. Now, and that was the scientia franca. It was the real science. Those were the theories that were considered were acceptable because, by and large, they were acceptable by the church. It was the monks who translated these manuscripts. So they released this knowledge through the translation of the manuscripts, so it was okay, all right, quality control as far as the knowledge is concerned. So whatever was in the writings, in those writings, was approved. And so then the doctors of the time were trained based on those writings and those views, and that's how the Hippocratic understanding of the Humerus was reintroduced in the West. I don't know, this is the extent to what my history knowledge goes.
But how they
Separated?
disappear? Yeah, the theory of...
Excuse me.
Can I ask?
Yes. There is another one.
My question for Mr. Sikalidis. Dr. Aleksandra calculating nutrition in introduction and nutrition lesson. We can calculate with bulb calorimeters, but how could they calculate how they could calculate nutrition calories in 19 or this century?
So I believe the question is, today we have the proper instrumentation in order to measure things like calories and so forth.
could
How
they
were they
calculate?
able to calculate things back then? Well, one of the things that they were very good at, which we are losing with instrumentation, is observation. So Hippocrates and many other physical philosophers of the time were very keen and astute students of human nature, and they were very good in terms of observation. So they had, they had scales at the time, and they could tell if somebody was gaining or losing weight. So in an indirect way, a very gross, if you will, they were able to tell if the diet of a person was putting weight on him or not. Also, they would assess the overall health. So the idea is that if the person is looking healthy and has an overall good health, if the person is fit, if you can perform certain physical tasks, and at the same time is neither losing nor gaining weight, then that would pretty much qualify for something for a person being healthy. So that was pretty much the way they would come to the conclusion. And to answer your question as to how did the theory of the Humerus disappeared, it didn't disappear. It was just replaced and refined. So after, like in the 18th century, when science went beyond religion, so when the first anatomy schools in Amsterdam were created and so forth, so the people were actually performing experiments, and they were able to do things that were not allowed up until that time because of the church. They supplemented that knowledge, and they discovered that it was not, well, there was a basis of truth, but it was not 100% correct. So it didn't really disappear, but it evolved. This is the way I would look at it.
Another question? The last one.
Yeah, hello. Well, about today, not about history. For example, as a daily example, when you go out in Istanbul during the day for lunch, you can find some ev yemekleri. But at night when you go out, you can't find it because the places at night are more about the economical rationale, capitalism, that, you know, more high-priced places either selling meat products or fish products, and there is an economy behind it because people like to relax at night and have big meals and so on. So how do you think, but I assume, I mean, would it be, but when you go to a place like Bozcaada or Gökçeada at night, you can find this Mediterranean diet restaurants, esnaf lokantası or similar things. So how do you think capitalism and the metropole rationale in terms of maybe making the most profit or these things, anything about this is changing the supply of food from the restaurants? Because you can cook homemade food, of course, but when you're out, for example, in Istanbul, it's very hard. As we always go to dinner together, it's very hard to find the Mediterranean diet restaurant. So.
Okay, so how do we incorporate into a market and capitalist model healthy eating and traditional eating? Well, we would have to hire 2 or 3 postdocs and maybe a few PhD students maybe to find the solution and the answer to that question. But one of the things that I would think of is the size. So you go to some of these restaurants and they are able to serve, I don't know, 300 people even. It is very difficult to maintain like quality and standards when you have to serve for 300 people. Now, one of the things that we saw with Dr. Anagnostakis' lecture, what happened, where did the Byzantine shift it away from the Aegean diet? It was an effect of urbanization. When everybody comes to the big city, well, okay, then the farming is not enough, so you have to actually bring things from abroad, from far away. When you are dependent on things to be brought from far away, the quality is being oftentimes not optimal. The chain of supply oftentimes may be cut off. So urbanization and like large establishments are not making it feasible for quality to be preserved. This is a general law of nature. I mean, inflation reduces the value of the unit. So especially this fine dining concept and delicatessen and all that, one of the things that they do is the limitation in terms of production and quantity. So I think like more smaller restaurants, for instance, you're not going to make profit by the bulk, you're going to make profit by the unit. All right? But again, this is something that the public, the people, will have to support. If you prefer to go to Burger King, well then every corner, every second corner, you will be finding a Burger King because this is how the economy works. But if you don't go to Burger King and you sponsor something else, well, that something else will flourish. I think it's as simple as that. I don't think it's a magic.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your coming, and I hope that this conference was interesting and helpful, useful, etc. Let's keep the words of Hippocrates in our mind. That means let the food be the medicine and the medicine our food, the food. But sometimes to be out of the rule, it is, very good to eat a good portion of baklava or a hamburger, etc. Okay, thank you very much.